This episode of Can We Please Talk podcast is presented by our friends over at SeatGeek. Do not hit skip right now because your next best night ever is waiting, and SeatGeek has the tickets, shows, music events, sporting events, whatever you want to go to SeatGeek.com right now. SeatGeek.com right now. Enter in the promo code Can We Please Talk to get $20 off that purchase. Head to SeatGeek.com today. Hey, everybody. Welcome into an all-new episode of Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And reminiscing on the great works of Akira Toriyama. Shout out to Dragon Ball Z. I'll wedge it in somehow, because it sucks in his passing. I'm Nick Saveri.
Oh, my God. I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. On the program today, the week that was last week in the U.S., here's something that we should be talking about. The first Super Tuesday came and went. Donald Trump is the nominee. On the GOP side, President Biden delivered his State of the Union address. Alabama Senator Katie Britt gave the GOP response, and it was made for Lifetime TV. I'm sorry, C-SPAN TV, I should have said there. Nick and I are going to recap the week that was since my partner was away on vacation. We're going to look at the two speeches. We're going to separate fact from fiction across these speeches and more. Plus, later on the program, speaking of a presidential candidate joined us, Jason Palmer. If you don't know the story of Jason Palmer, who won the American Samoa caucus last week or 2 weeks ago, I believe, as he defeated President Biden out there, he was able to win that, secure those delegates. He joins us in our final segment and tells you all about his platform and how you can go to palmerforpresident.us to find out more about him. He's been making the rounds on the interview circuit. A phenomenal job by him and his team to get a victory there. Again, the only defeat that President Biden has had so far throughout the primaries and caucus that have happened on the Democratic side. All right. Now I say hello to my co-host, Nick Saveri, who was on the most magical place on earth. He was not paying attention to Super Tuesday, maybe some of the State of the Union. Nick, what's going on here? How's everything? How was the trip? How are you doing? We're going to get into a bunch. We're going to let you fire off some hot takes, even though we say we don't do hot takes. We're going to let you fire off some hot takes about Nikki Haley suspending her campaign. But what was going on as you did not pay attention, or did you pay attention as you were in the most magical place on earth at Disney?
No, Tuesday we were. What were we Tuesday? I think Tuesday we're at. Oh, I think we're at Hollywood Studios on Tuesday. So, in the midst of Super Tuesday madness, I was hanging out with stormtroopers, basically at Galaxy's Edge at Star Wars. It was a fun trip. Our girls are very lucky, man. That's all I'm going to say. It was our second trip to Disney in the last couple of years. Had an amazing time. The only tricky part of it is just get my wife home. My wife stayed a couple of days to go to a conference, but with the weather patterns going on, she has had one flight canceled and one delayed. So hopefully she'll be back, pretty soon. But in terms of Super Tuesday, I paid a little attention. I was, trying to follow some of the races. I will say some of the things that really stood out to me, though, and we'll obviously get into more of it, but all I'll tease out here is, some of the interesting measures that we've seen. Not even so much elections, but like some of these, like decisions that are coming out of like New York with, what's going on with the governor, San Francisco, with some things passing recently, just really interesting developments, especially in like the criminal justice side. That's what really stood out to me. As far as the State of the Union, I listened to it. I watched a little bit of it, but I think Thursday, I got back. No, Friday I did. Yeah, Friday the girls were back in their respective activities, so it was just me around the house. Yeah, I just listened. I just took a long walk and listened to it. So just jotting notes as I was, listening away. So a ton of takeaways for me, and obviously we'll touch on that. I said at the start, obviously about it's so totally random, but this past weekend though, in terms of just like big news, my timeline was just riddled with like anime stuff. The death of Akira Toriyama, who is the creator, of course, of Dragon Ball Z, and all that stuff. Huge name. Anytime you go to a Barnes Noble and you see a whole section on like manga, and if you're an anime fan at all, that name rings out a lot. I have obviously a copy of one of the books on my shelf. And that stood out to me just in terms of impact this week. In the midst of the craziness, from the State of the Union, they foolish and just completely inept response that we heard later on. In the midst of the political clown show that is the United States government, that passing that we heard over the weekend, just it was. You talk about people who've really done something magical. Like that's where someone like Akira Toriyama is coming from. Whereas someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's just shouting and wearing Trump, regalia, which by the way is illegal. Actually, you're not really supposed to do that at the State of the Union. Was cartoonish, and in the grand scheme of things, it really is about what you leave behind. And there's a lot of people, both left and right, that have a lot of silly talking points that, years from now, we're not going to be talking about the things that they have left behind. So that's kind of what stood out to me.
Oh, what way to land the plane there. I didn't know where you were going to go there. It was a little turbulent right there, but all right, you landed the plane all right safely. Not like a United flight that's been having some issues. You don't know what's been going on with United. Their wheels are falling off on some of their planes. So you know what? Let's get into our first segment here, Nick, because I want to ask you a little bit about because Super Tuesday. Like I said, I was on CNN special coverage. You can go to our YouTube channel. By the way, follow us over on Can We Please Talk podcast on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button. Obviously, follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Can We Please Talk podcast, on Twitter at Can We Please Talk. We were posting some clips. CNN was tagging me in some clips, actually, of some of the things that we recap for Super Tuesday. I have made the sticking point that it was never a platform or policy issue for Nikki Haley. It was a math issue. Like she never had the numbers to be able to get there. Primary voters, the turnout is always lower. So now you got to get people to go out there and vote for Nikki Haley. And like you just said, we had one of those dopes going out there in full Trump gear, wearing it on the House floor. Did you see anybody in Haley gear anytime soon, Nick? No, of course not. And so that was the issue. She couldn't get enough of the Democrats and independents in some of these open primaries to come over there and vote for her. So let me ask you real quick about Super Tuesday results. Obviously, Nikki Haley only won one state in Vermont by a very close margin, 50% to 45.9%. Donald Trump ran away with the rest of the races, including some of the margins where, people thought Colorado, Virginia, maybe she makes a little headway. No, she got killed 63 to 33, 63 to 35. California, she got murdered 78 to 17%. Alabama, obviously, Texas, those states were in the high 70s. What did you make of obviously it all kind of ending the way we all thought it would, but ending really on Super Tuesday because she suspended her campaign the next day? Like, what was kind of your read on it or takeaways, or there really isn't any because we've covered this so much and we all knew that the GOP primary voters have said that they wanted Donald Trump to represent them.
Yeah, I've used the analogy of Thanos a lot, from the Marvel, from the MCU, right? And that's kind of what had been always the case. We saw Nikki Haley won the primary in DC. I remember you texting me about that. We chuckled a little bit because it felt like it was just a drop in a really, really big bucket. What if I'm going to give a eulogy to the Haley campaign, what I will say is this: the party belongs to Donald Trump. We all knew this. We saw this go around what I would consider maybe a couple, Haley being on that list, of candidates who we thought may actually be a legitimate threat to Donald Trump. We saw Ron DeSantis, who I would argue at some point seemed like he may have been able to make a case, but in the end, he could not separate himself from Trump and tried to come off as Trump light. Here's a name we haven't talked about in a long time: Vivek Ramaswamy. We haven't talked about him in weeks, right? Suspended his campaign. Nikki Haley most recently. It's Trump's party. It's Trump's race at this point. And that's a statement about the Republicans. One thing that I think recently, I forgot who the anchor was at Fox News, but there was an exchange with a campaign person from the Trump team. And the anchor had talked about language. And, this anchor, older gentleman, is trying to talk about decency and, a campaign line or something that, that Trump had said about the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, that's his name, referred to him as Gavin Newscum. And the anchor brought up and said, do you think this kind of language is going to work for Haley supporters? Which is code for level-headed Republicans. Again, obviously, as the left-leaning member of this show, there's not a whole lot that I have in common with Republicans, but there is the common ground of decency that I still truly believe, at least from the party of Reagan, had once existed. And, this candidate, just like any Trump robot, couldn't give a straight answer and said, well, this is what the voters want. Now, to be fair, she's right in the sense that this is what they want. They're fine with the candidate who wants to make fun of people that have physical disabilities. This is the same candidate. I don't even need to go through the rap sheet of guffaws and foolishness that is Donald Trump. We've done enough on this show. You can simply go ahead and Google all that. But what's important to note is that, the party that we've seen of Republicans really since 2010 and the Tea Party has really materialized over the past 14 years to the party of a cartoon character. And there's a lot of questions now about within that party, are they going to completely unify, behind Donald Trump? And that's really the question there. As far as Haley goes, at least as a campaign, you and I talked about her response to the question about abortion, which at the time seemed like the most level-headed response. This was a person who was trying to remind people of the dignity of women, regardless of what your decision, how you feel about a woman's right to choose, at least approaching the situation from a place of decency and not looking to view this from a punitive standpoint. She was the only voice that said that, and it was drowned out. But then, oddly enough, she also, and I think this did kind of, in a small level, kind of destroy her campaign when she came out in support of Alabama's Supreme Court's ruling about IVF. That looked absolutely just asinine, and it completely flew in the face of the person we thought she was originally. She could never separate herself from Trump. And I really like, Mike, you said this on CNN a couple of times. I'm appreciating that you're bringing it here. In primaries, we're looking at the most passionate of voters, and the most ardent, steadfast Republican voters at this point prefer Donald Trump. And that's really the end to her campaign and to anyone else at this point.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
I agree. I mean, there's nothing else to add to that. Bakari Sellers, who happened to be on the panel with me that night, said there is no such thing as a Nikki Haley supporter. Like before this, right? You got to get a little bit ginned up. And it was more of like a vote for people that say they're dissatisfied with Donald Trump as that they like Nikki Haley. It was always like, I'm dissatisfied with Donald Trump. It just wasn't enough of those people that were dissatisfied to move the needle. And, kind of Chris Christie, excuse me, almost Freudian slip there and called him Krispy Kreme. Chris Christie's, what he said on that hot mic back in New Hampshire about she's going to get killed. I mean, he was right because, again, turning out that voter during the primaries, it's very tough to do. There's already low enthusiasm. This guy has higher enthusiasm amongst the base. So we leave it there on that front. Let's actually pivot to the guy who actually is the president of the United States, Nick. In President Biden, he gave the State of the Union address a couple of days ago, airing across all of the networks. We're going to analyze a little bit of the speech, and then we're going to get into the response by Alabama Senator Katie Britt that has been making the rounds, and a text message that I got today by somebody who happens to know her very closely. More on that in just a bit. But if you missed any of the speech, the president touched on a bunch of different things, obviously immigration, the war in Ukraine, Israel's response in Gaza right now, and the hostage situation that still continues to plague Israel and the 140 plus hostages that have still not been returned home. Talked about the deficit. He talked about his predecessor, and he continued to say those words, his predecessor, and not his opponent, obviously, for different reasons. But if you didn't catch some of the speech, take a listen to some of the highlights here.
In January 1941, Franklin Roosevelt came to this chamber to speak to the nation, and he said, "I address you at a moment unprecedented in the history of the Union. Hitler was on the march. War was raging in Europe. President Roosevelt's purpose was to wake up Congress and alert the American people that this was no ordinary time. Freedom and democracy were under assault in the world. Tonight, I come to this same chamber to address the nation. Now, it's we who face an unprecedented moment in the history of the Union. And yes, my purpose tonight is to wake up the Congress and alert the American people that this is no ordinary moment either. But now, assistance to Ukraine is being blocked by those who want to walk away from our world leadership. It wasn't long ago when a Republican president named Ronald Reagan thundered, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Now, my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." That's a quote. A former president actually said that, bowing down to a Russian leader. I think it's outrageous, it's dangerous, and it's unacceptable. My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th. I will not do that. This is the moment to speak the truth and to bury the lies. Here's the simple truth. You can't love your country only when you win. In November, my team began serious negotiation with a bipartisan group of senators. The result was a bipartisan bill with the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen. Oh, you don't think so? Oh, you don't like that bill, huh? That conservatives got together and said it was a good bill? I'll be darned. That's amazing. That bipartisan bill would hire 1,500 more security agents and officers, 100 more immigration judges to help tackle the backload of 2 million cases, 4,300 more asylum officers, and new policies so they can resolve cases in 6 months instead of 6 years now. Many of you in this chamber and my predecessor are promising to pass a national ban on reproductive freedom. My God, what freedom else would you take away? Look, it's a decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court majority wrote the following, and with all due respect, justices, women are not without electoral or political power. You're about to realize just how much you're right about that.
So you heard a little bit there of the speech. I did want to, obviously, we're going to give our takes on the speech, and I had mentioned this, I forget where, about, I gave this speech, grade-wise. I mean, I don't know why we're grading these speeches. I never liked that the State of the Union is in front of everybody, because I think it takes longer with all of the applause breaks, and that they're all doing the political posturing of just standing up, applauding any little thing, like even that Gorbachev line. There was 4 or 5 times in that montage you just heard there of people clapping and applauding. And that, for me, ruins a little bit more of what the speech is. I'd rather it just be from the Oval Office. He sits there 45 minutes to an hour, delivers his speech, hits on his points. Like, I've always been a fan of that. I'm not into the theatrics, because then you can clip out the Marjorie Taylor Greenes wearing, a red tracksuit that's MAGA. You don't have to deal with that. The president just have to shake all these hands and stuff like that. I get it. I get why they do it. Never liked it. We're going to get into Katie Britt's response. I never liked the rap battle diss track responses that they tend to do with the other side. I don't care who's president. When Bush is president, the Dems would give the thing. It always drove me nuts. This is a group project. We get graded on a group project. You guys are supposed to work together, not supposed to give me a diss track to when Jay-Z put out The Takeover, and now you're giving me Nas Ether. Like, we're not supposed to be dissing each other. We're supposed to be working together. So the responses always made me lose my mind. So I wanted to get that out before the way. But real quick, Nick, before I turn to you to actually give a grade or an assessment on the speech, which I thought was around a B-, like I said, because of the moments of interruption And there was a couple of points there. There was a Marine father, one of the Marines killed in Afghanistan. The father was yelling because I think his son was killed in the blast that happened at Kabul airport when U.S. troops were trying to withdraw from Afghanistan. If you want to hammer the Biden administration on something, that's the biggest one to hammer on throughout his presidency so far. The withdrawal that they said was easily going to be, hey, it's going to be propped up. The Afghani president is in power. Then all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, the Taliban have taken control. And now we had, 13, 14 Marines that were killed. You want to kill him on that, kill him on that. So there was a couple parts in the speech that got interrupted and stuff like that. But I did want to fact check a couple quick things, because the first thing that you heard there in the montage about Trump saying to Putin, you can do whatever the hell you want, and that's a quote. It's not a direct quote. So basically what Trump said was, the full quote was, one of the presidents of a big country, this is when he was talking about NATO at one of his rallies, stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay, our share, which, by the way, there is no entry fee or payment into NATO. That's not how it works. More on that later on. One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? And in the speech, Trump now says, I said, you didn't pay, you're delinquent. Yes, let's say that didn't happen. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. So that's the full quote. Again, just a mild thing there. There was a couple other things from the speech that he mentioned about the immigration bill, and you heard it there in the montage. I've mentioned this a bunch of times. Senator James Lankford has mentioned this a bunch of times about the repatriation flights that bill would account for to get people back to their country of origin, the immigration judges that this would hire because of the backlog of so many folks that are in this country and have not had their asylum trials yet. And we're going to get into the Lake and Riley stuff in a second, because it was kind of a little bit of the subject of what came out of Senator Katie Britt's response video. But a situation like that could have been avoided because that person would have already had their trial or had been processed or had been kept in New York, because the enforcement agencies don't talk to local law enforcement. We're going to get into that in a second. But what did you make overall, Nick, of the speech? You said you had listened to it now in its entirety. He did a bunch there. Obviously, in the montage, he did a lot more. Overall, talking about, federal deficit, being cut by more than $1 trillion since he's been in office, which is true. Inflation is down to about 3%. It's not the lowest in the world, like he said, but it is down to about 3% here in the U.S. There's a bunch, on the immigration stuff, and you heard that there in the back and forth. But what do you make overall of his tone, his tenor, the things that he hit on, his demeanor throughout the night, the memes that are going around social media? What do you make of it all?
But bluntly, if he brings the energy to the debates, I think he wins actually by a larger margin than he may possibly have anticipated. I think part of the problem that Biden has had, see, on one side of it, there's the calls from a lot of young people about the criticism of Biden's hesitancy to ask for a ceasefire, which I totally understand that. But what we've been doing lately has just been criticizing Biden for his silence, really, on certain issues. When the man actually talks, he sounds very capable, at least in this forum. I thought the speech was great. I thought the speech is what was needed. Yes, there are certain things we can absolutely nitpick about, but I think overall it was exactly what was needed to be said. And the energy that he brought to it. Like I said, I watched a little bit of it, but I just mostly listened to it. And the thing I wanted to pay attention to is, does this person sound, and I'm just speaking for myself, does this person sound capable enough to continue to lead my country? And the answer is yes, at least from that speech. Interestingly enough, from a health standpoint, there was at least 4 or 5 times where there was a coughing going on, and I kept picking up on him, like, that plays into the health concerns.
Yep.
It doesn't necessarily play into like his competency. And I'll say this though, when you compare what he said on Thursday, and obviously it's a speech, but when you compare, everything we've heard from Donald Trump, who keeps banging the drum about a stolen election, about, the evil of the left, and most recently playing the Nazi hits, talking about the blood of America being stained by foreigners and all that crap. Biden sounded capable. He sounded competent. And I think that's the energy he's going to need. I hope his team looked at that and said, we need to give him more space to do that. A couple of things that stood out to me. First off, by the way, and this only stood out to me because we've asked a guest on this show. I think it may have been Ryan Binkley we asked this to, former presidential hopeful and now basically coward. Yeah, I said it. To Donald Trump. So, but we asked, about the two-state solution. It was very refreshing to have the president of the United States step forward and say very clearly what is his view about the situation in the Middle East going forward. And the idea of a two-state solution, and we can argue this if we want to, have other people on the show, fine. But it was refreshing to hear very clearly where his view is on that. And he also owned the fact that, or at least recognized that the hostage situation still needs to be resolved. And on top of that, at the same time, he did a very smart maneuver, or at least his speechwriters did, of acknowledging what's going on, with the constant attacks by the Israeli army in Gaza. And again, we're in the midst of a war. Let's not fool ourselves. But recognizing that, the response to a hostage crisis is something that can be debated. It is okay to have a conversation about that. I thought was something that was notable. He made a comment about, I'm not anti-corporation. You'll notice that Biden does this from time to time because, obviously the right will try to demonize him as a socialist like they do for all Democrats. And, Biden constantly reminds people that he's a centrist. Early on, he mentioned the laws in Texas and Alabama. I was glad that he did. I think this is one of the biggest problems that Republicans have right now, is that since Roe versus Wade is now a decision that has been now given into the hands of the states, we're seeing what some states are doing, and this is what Democrats are capitalizing on. And we've talked on this show often about where we've seen victories in states that are making it very clear their stances on a woman's right to choose. I think the only criticism I had, those two criticisms. One was, deep breath, you got to stop the January 6th stuff. Believe it or not, if you're going to talk about it, what you can simply say is you can note the hypocrisy from a political party that likes to talk about law and order, that has nothing to say about members of the Capitol Police Department committing suicide and being physically harassed by protesters. You can simply leave it there. To talk about the fact that there was an attack on our government. It's true, but you're playing the hits at this point. And I think you were talking about this a little earlier about we've heard this before. When he talked about January 6th, I found myself rolling my eyes, honestly. Because I've heard this constantly. The reality is the FBI, Homeland Security, the Capitol Police Department, there's been numerous arrests. Now, Mike Johnson, House Speaker, does not want to show videos and wants to be critical. And we saw his swarmy face as Biden talked about that and why anyone would try to, hold off, showing and show voice displeasure or show displeasure at someone talking about the United States still standing after January 6th is beyond me. But I'm past it. Law enforcement did its job going forward. These monsters who tried to parade into the building, who did parade into the building, have been rightfully arrested. And hopefully they stay in prison for a long, long time. The other one was the comment of history is watching us. I don't think that really lands really as strongly on younger voters. I think right now younger voters are looking at student loan debt, the challenges of buying a home. What does the future look like for them? At some point, Biden in the speech made a comment about standing up for seniors. And we've heard that often about Social Security. Folks, we need to have Canada at some point say we need to stand for younger people. Now, to Biden's credit, that administration has forgiven I think we're in the billions now in terms of student loan debt relief. So they've certainly done something. But I think talking about history pays attention right now, people even our age don't care. We're talking about the here and now. But those are the only two criticisms. I mean, a grade for me, I'm probably going to go an A-. And I'm probably only going to say that, I actually thought he handled the criticisms well. When you had these morons yelling and trying to shout him down about the immigration policy or the immigration bill. And he sounds like a playful grandfather. Oh, you didn't like the bill?
Right.
Well, it's like, we don't need all this. But I did like the fact he on a few occasions, and I know you're bringing up the fact that should not be about politics and we all need to get together to win. Like, let's be very honest with ourselves. There's one political party right now that likes to live more in divisiveness than the other. Let's just be honest with ourselves. And that's the current version of the Republican Party. You can debate me on that if you want to. So it's fair in the campaign speech, and this is an election year. You cannot expect the president of the United States to not try and use that as a platform to talk about what the other party is doing. Not to mention the fact that there's been almost no legislation. And that's what he brought up. How many bills numerously brought up, including the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that constantly sits on the floor of Congress because you have yet another House Speaker that wants to do nothing. Republicans have been in control of the House since throughout 2024. And rightfully, the president brings up the fact that we're putting all this stuff up there and nothing's getting done. I think it's totally fine. If I were him, I'd have turned and looked dead in Mike Johnson's face and say, that's on you.
Right.
But, I understand your point, though. Like, in the end, we do need, both sides to work together. But there's one political party right now, at least in the House. I think in the Senate, there's more level-headed people. But at least as far as the House goes, there are people that rightfully should have been called out.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I have no retort to that because I agree on the House part of this. I'm just saying, like, in the larger scheme of this, like, I don't need these back and forth GOP response after the thing. Like, we're supposed to be on the same team. But it shows American politics. Like, we love to one up each other and we love to not work together. And that's why the immigration bill, I've been really hard on, and I've been talking about this on other platforms because, again, the two people that drafted the bill is the most conservative man from Oklahoma and one of the most progressive dudes from Connecticut. The two senators, like you said, level-headedness, they come up with this thing. It's not going to solve the border. We've had border folks that cover the border daily down there talk about no administration has been able to solve this. And we're going to get into a story right now of the response from GOP Senator Katie Britt, because Katie Britt mentioned the story about the border, this horrific tale, this woman that was sex trafficked. Slight problem. It happened 20 years ago during the Bush administration. Now, if you don't know anything about Katie Britt's response, you didn't watch any of the GOP response, take a listen to the response here, just a quick montage of what Katie sounded like.
Good evening, America. My name is Katie Britt, and I have the honor of serving the people of the great state of Alabama in the United States Senate. However, that's not the job that matters most. I am a proud wife and mom of two school-aged kids. My daughter Bennett and my son Ridgway are why I ran for the Senate. I'm worried about their future and the future of children in every corner of our nation. And that's why I invited you into our home tonight. Like so many families across America, my husband Wesley and I just watched President Biden's State of the Union address from our living room. And what we saw was the performance of a permanent politician who has actually been in office for longer than I've been alive. But minutes after taking office, he suspended all deportations, he halted construction of the border wall, and he announced a plan to give amnesty to millions. We know that President Biden didn't just create this border crisis. He invited it with 94 executive actions in his first 100 days. Just think about Laken Riley. In my neighboring state of Georgia, this beautiful 22-year-old nursing student went out on a jog one morning, but she never got the opportunity to return home. She was brutally murdered by one of the millions of illegal border crossers President Biden chose to release into our homeland. Y'all, as a mom, I can't quit thinking about this. I mean, this could have been my daughter. This could have been yours. And tonight, President Biden finally said her name.
Tell you what name he's not going to be saying much longer is Senator Katie Britt. Listen, a couple things here before we demystify some of the speech. I'm not even going to give it a grade. I don't really care about that. Like I just mentioned to you before, I don't think these response videos from the other party should ever be happening. I think it should be State of the Union. That's the person who's the president. He's the president for all of us. Same thing when Donald Trump had his. I don't need a Democratic side response video. Now, two things real quick before we get into the Lake and Riley stuff and how she's wrong on some of that, based on just the local reporting and some of the stuff that I mentioned before about the agencies, both local and federal, not talking to each other, which is why this guy was able to be in Athens, Georgia. But I got a text message from a really good friend of mine that I worked with for years at Warner Media. And she had texted me that her sister is best friends with Katie Britt. And I was like, no way. I need to know more about this. Like, tell me about her. And as things have started to make the rounds on social media about how performative her speech was, you can hear some of the overemphasis and the tone of her message, which was not needed. Because like I mentioned before, there are things to criticize the Biden administration about 100%. There are 100% things to criticize about. We're involved right now, even though foreign policy is always lower on voter issues. We're involved right now in two wars, not militarily, but we're involved financially in giving weapons. And we're helping to eradicate a part of the country, a part of the world, that most people couldn't point out on a map. And we're helping one of those countries, even though that country got attacked. And then on the other side, if you go a little bit further east, right, a dictator is invading the country that neighbors to the south of him. There's a lot to criticize the Biden administration for, but when you do it to high school level, guys and dolls performance level, it's not going to garner the same type of response. And so when I talked to my friend who happens to know, like I said, Katie Britt well, she echoed the same thing. Like, I don't understand why she gave that speech. And most importantly, from the kitchen, which, as our friend Olivia Troy, Nick, said on Twitter, former official that worked in the Trump administration, and she was an advisor to Vice President Pence, she said, yeah, do it in the kitchen, right where Republicans want to send us back to, AKA women. And I thought it was apropos because, again, this is a Republican that said that, not me saying this. This is Olivia Troy, so you can follow her on social media. You can get mad at her. I didn't say it. She said it. So that was the first thing that I noticed. Very performative, unnecessarily, because you don't need to do that. If you look at Tim Scott's response last year's State of the Union, I believe it was Tim Scott that gave it. It wasn't as performative and overemphasizing things. And then the biggest issue is, let's get into the fact checking of it. She said President Biden suspended all deportations on his first day in office. He sent out a memo pausing the removals of certain people illegally in the U.S. for the first 100 days. But then as resources were allocated to those priorities, they reinforced it. There have been more than 3.6 million removals, returns, and expulsions from February 21, Biden's first month in office, to September of 2023. That's according to DHS estimates. And you can find all this, by the way, on politifact.com, which is, our good friends over at the Poynter Institute have this site that gives the fact checking of both speeches. Biden, she said, halted construction of the border wall, if you've heard that. Now, Biden issued a proclamation terminating the national emergency, which is what Trump was using to divert the Defense Department funding to build this border wall, at least the barriers for it. But then in October of this past year, the administration resumed the construction. If you remember, Nick, there was a big fuss made about Alejandro Mayorkas reinstituting this because the Biden administration had put it back into place. So the money Congress had previously appropriated, they started making barrier repairs. And so people were like, oh, he's doing the same thing that Trump did. So she's half right, kind of on the first part, but she doesn't mention the second part, which is the Biden administration over the last 3 or 4 months has reinstituted all of this because they have acknowledged that there has been a crisis at the border, which, to our point, again, if you want to criticize the Biden administration, speak to us like normal human beings. You don't need to be performative about it. He's literally backtracking on a policy that his former predecessor used to have. Say that. Don't give me a story of something that happened 20 years ago. And then it funnels into the last thing that you heard there in the package, which is about Laken Riley. Listen, if you don't know the story of Laken Riley, and Nick, before I turn to you for your thoughts on this speech, Laken Riley, Augusta University nursing student, 22 years old. She went out for a jog. She got murdered. The killer was Jose Antonio Ibarra. He was in Athens, Georgia. Go check out this story. First off, it's incredibly tragic. Our thoughts and prayers are to her family. 100%. You got that? Everybody got that? Everybody document that. Everyone save it, voice note it, put it in an email. It's a shame what happened to this girl. It's terrible. It doesn't need to be a dramatic effect of your two kids. You don't need to do all that. But it's 100% incredibly terrible what happened to this poor girl. And according to DHS, Ibarra and his wife entered the U.S. in El Paso in September of 2022. He was arrested and released. His wife said that they were put on a bus and sent to New York. But at the time, because he's Venezuelan, he had special protective status in the U.S. And why is that? Because if you don't know what's happening in Venezuela and the unrest and the dictator that they have in office, and Nicolas Maduro, you should learn a little bit more about that. And so they couldn't send him back to his country of origin because of the political unrest. It could be a national disaster. So at the time, he was making food deliveries in New York City, according to this article from 11alive.com, which is the local affiliate that's been covering this story. And at the point, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement took him into custody, but he was later released by the New York Police Department. So what did he do from there? Because he was released, he was sent to Athens, Georgia. He went to go to Athens, Georgia, where his brother Diego lives. This is all according to the article. He was arrested in Athens, Georgia, for shoplifting at a local Walmart. So again, arrested now. These are small things that he's being arrested for, but he's in the system and he's being arrested, but he's not being detained because, according to the Athens Clark County Police Department, the officers did not have immediate access to the immigration status that ICE has, obviously, in their database. So because of that, there was nothing they could do because it's a misdemeanor. So he paid a small fine and they let him go. And then obviously what ends up happening is the murder. And a lot of people have pointed to that Athens is a sanctuary city, which the designation implies that the community doesn't cooperate with the federal government to enforce the immigration law. But like I just mentioned, the agencies weren't talking to each other to be able to say that this guy has been flagged in the system. Another part that the Senate bipartisan compromise bill is addressing, or at least wanted to address, with respect to hiring and how the agencies actually talk to each other about these issues. So again, just to put a bow on it, Laken Riley, rest in peace. Terrible what happened to her. I'm all for people bringing attention to this crazy story. But like I mentioned on TV, and like I'm mentioning here, again, this person was detained a couple times and was let go. And the University of Wisconsin-Madison, this is not Mike Leon saying this, Nick. This is the University of Wisconsin-Madison, did a study that compared the crime rates of undocumented immigrants and U.S.-born citizens. This is residing in Texas, U.S.-born citizens residing in Texas. The U.S.-born residents were more than 2 times more likely to commit violent crimes and nearly 2.5 times more likely to violate a drug law. This is according to a survey and study that's not survey, a study that was done by the University of Wisconsin-Madison. You can go check it out at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's website. It's not me talking. So again, the thoughts and prayers and what happened with Laken Riley, absolutely terrible. It is a small blip on this huge thematic thing about undocumented crimes that are happening all throughout this country. They're not. This is not me saying it. This is the math and the data saying it. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't. So let's get that out the way right now. All right, now I turn to you real quick because I want to get a little bit of your thoughts on not only the speech there, but there was a couple of parts there. You know, there's the dramatic and the theatrics of it, which I have no idea why she did that. Camera set up in her kitchen, no idea why she did that. Somebody should have helped her with that. Maybe somebody with production background that did it for Fox News. Maybe he hosts a podcast. I don't know. Maybe I could have helped you with that. Either way, be that as it may, she touches on a bunch of points there. The president's out of touch. He's a career politician, which I've heard a lot of over these last couple of days as I've gone to a wedding and a party here in Miami. Primary voters, they call me Mr. CNN. CNN's not paying me, so stop calling me that. But they call me that, and here they are. I don't like Biden. He's a career politician, which means they're all hearing it from somewhere, Nick, and they're regurgitating it now in conversations. And I picked up on that. And I'm like, that is the fourth time I've heard that this week. Who's been telling you guys this? What'd you make of the speech? What did you make of the response, the theatrics? What do you make of it all?
Well, thank you for giving me some space to discuss this, Mr. CNN. Yeah, cults operate like that, folks. When you have shared terminology that's repeated on and on and on, and all your followers use the same nonsense, congratulations, you're in a cult. So as far as Katie Britt goes, yeah, I mean, I thought her tone was just odd to me. The fact that she talks about her most important job being a mom, that's awesome. Listen, I feel the same way. I'm a father. That's cool. In terms of filming in the kitchen, Mike, let's just cut to the chase. Like, this is the idea of, like, I'm going to appeal to people in the home. I'm going to appeal to parents. I'm about to scare the pants off you, because that's what Republicans do really well. And I'm going to go ahead and start this by painting the picture of, I live in a nice, comfortable home. And I believe that, we are under the threat of the evil Democrats. That's the playbook. It's always been the playbook since Nixon. So, but that's odd to me, considering this comes from Katie Britt, who back in 2022, now Katie Britt actually has been in office really only since like 2023. Back in 2022, there's an article over at the Yellowhammer that talks about Katie Britt earning the highest NRA rating for someone who has not entered office yet. She was awarded an AQ rating, which is the highest possible rating for a candidate seeking office without prior legislative voting or voting record. That's important because I find it hysterical that I'm hearing someone talk about safety when they're pictured on the website holding a, wait for it, machine gun. Let me get this straight. You're concerned about the evil brown people coming to this country while you want to walk around like a wannabe Lauren Boebert brandishing a Call of Duty weapon. I'm supposed to take you seriously about safety. Get all the way the hell out of here with that. This is an asinine argument to make. Yes, should we be upset about the death of an American citizen? Absolutely. But if you really want to get into who's more deadly in this country, it's a white person with a gun. It always has been. Stop it. But Republicans will never do that. Fear-mongering is the lifeblood of that party. So I'm not shocked that she tries to sell this story to me and the rest of America about that the Democrats are letting in the evil brown people. We've been hearing this shit since 2015, since Trump ran for office. Off the they're letting the Mexicans letting in rapists and every kind of racial dog whistle nonsense you want to put out there. It was foolish. It was ridiculous. And there's a reason why we're not seeing that speech, by the way, all over social media. I'm on IG quite often, folks. You know what that clip I'm not seeing? A lot of that. You know what I am seeing a lot of more of? Saturday Night Live. You know why? Because even Republicans are not excited about that speech. So they decided to take one of their young and up-and-coming politicians, and hopefully we can put her on a platform and we're going to see her take off and say some really poignant stuff. And she said not a damn thing that was worth listening to. You want to talk about career politicians? That's great. That's awesome. Go ahead and talk about that, about the current president. That's all you got. I mean, you could look at that speech and talk about the challenges of an economic vision when you continue to be riddled in debt. We could talk about, the president's talking about trying to keep jobs through the CHIPS Act, which again, I mean, that's real. We could talk about Democrats historically not necessarily being pro-labor. We could talk about the fact that the AEW gave money to Trump. There is cracks in the union foundation that favor Republicans. None of that. Kitchen table BS from someone who wants to walk around with a machine gun. I'm supposed to take her seriously? Get all the way the hell out of here with this. It was a foolish argument. And if you want to perpetuate the evil brown people from from Latin America stereotype, this is so not the show to do that on. So I laughed at it when I saw it, and I thought it was cartoonish. And it was hysterical that the party took this person. You know who would have been a much better choice for the response? And it was staring them right in the face. Donald Trump. You could have easily, Now, he wasn't in court that time. It's one of the rare times he's not in court these days. You could have put a camera in front of him. There's no rule that says you have to have a member of, an elected official. It's not true. You could have actually called up Trump and said, hey, do you want to come on and do this? But they thought, no, let's put a white woman up there, a young white woman who we could think as being the future of the party. A woman in Alabama when, IVF can barely be recognized at this point. This party has the audacity to put up a white woman and try to sell us on that you're the party of young people? Shut up. Stop it. It was embarrassing. And she embarrassed herself.
Just real quick, you gave some great points there that she literally could have used in the speech. I'm glad that you said that because it's true about the union giving money to Trump. We saw that when both of them went to Michigan. Like there were so many different things. This is my issue right here, folks. It's 2024. We're going to go back to a John Mayer line that he said almost 20 years ago in his song. Say what you mean to say. Like, don't sit here and give me this performance of a lifetime as the Oscars just happened yesterday. Don't sit here and play up on the theatrics and overemphasize words. Even Biden was yelling at a couple different points. Now, again, he's doing it in a speech to a bunch of, people in the chambers and people are yelling at him. So I get why he was yelling and shouting at different times. Still, I don't need him to do it, but I get why he was doing it. Katie Britt, what are you doing? Who told you to do that? Who told you to overemphasize your words and phrases and pivot from an emotional range standpoint? This is not an audition. As somebody who has set up cameras before to interview people on and then actually been on camera, yes, there's a little bit of performance, but not like that. Just talk like a normal human being. There are legitimate issues, and Nick just gave you 3 of them, and you didn't even mention not one of them in that entire speech. All right. Speaking of issues, speaking of candidates, speaking of presidents, hopefully this guy will be president one day. I know he would like to be. Jason Palmer, he's running for president of the United States on the Democrat side. He recently won the caucus that happened in American Samoa. Jason's going to explain how he did it, his message to President Biden, and his platform overall. Jason, when we come back after the break. Nick, today's episode is presented as always by our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Since 2009, their passion has always been bringing you gourmet coffees from all over the world, roasted fresh to order. I got my coffee snob here, Nick Saveri. Nick, tell these people, coffee snob it up here. Tell these people why Fresh Roasted Coffee is so good and why they're the official sponsor of Can We Please Talk.
Often the best cup of coffee that you're ever going to have is the one you can make from home. And you need good quality coffee to do that. And that's what Fresh Roasted Coffee offers. Between single origin, between blends, flavors, anything on the coffee spectrum they've got. But more importantly, and I can't stress this enough, often when you purchase coffee, you don't know where to start. I mean, there's so many different varieties, so many different opportunities, so many different things you could choose from. And Fresh Roasted Coffee just gives you a very simple questionnaire and just says, hey, figure out what your coffee cup is. Figure out what blend works for you. I've gotten some single origin recommendations, so has Mike, and that's influenced everything. And what they recommend, you can get in a Keurig cup, the way Mike takes it. You can take it in the way I do it, which is typically through a French press, or you can get it for a percolator. Whatever coffee machine you've got, they've got you covered. But more importantly, just a huge variety and a way to learn more about coffee itself.
And all of this is available at freshroastedcoffee.com on their site. 1 cup is all it takes to fall in love with Fresh Roasted Coffee, but you get a discount for being a listener of Can We Please Talk. Enter in the promo code Can We Please Get 20 to get 20% off your first purchase. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com today. Nick, quick break from the pod because this episode is presented by our friends over at SeatGeek. Your next best night ever is waiting, my friend, and they've got the tickets. You want to go to an NBA game, an NFL game, a concert, Major League Baseball, whatever it is, all you got to do is go to SeatGeek.com. You're going to enter in the promo code Can We Please Talk, and you're going to get $20 off that purchase right now at SeatGeek. Nick, what are you going to do with your $20 off on those tickets, buddy?
I mean, that saves me on anything. I can get food at the game. I can just get the tickets themselves. I mean, baseball's coming along, so I'm excited for that. I can get Upper Deck tickets and just nothing. And then all I got to do is worry about food. I mean, anywhere I want to use this, it's well worth it. $20 is a worthwhile investment.
That's right. And I've seen you at sporting events. You eat a lot. Nick needs those $20 off. So go to SeatGeek.com right now. Enter in the promo code, Can We Please Talk? You're going to get $20 off that purchase. All right. A couple of weeks ago, actually a week ago on Super Tuesday, there was a surprise that happened in American Samoa, or Samoa, as some people may say, even our candidate that's featured here in the interview. But there was a surprise that happened in the caucus out there. A candidate beat Joe Biden 51-40 out there and won the delegates. And I happened to be working CNN special coverage that night. And everyone was like, do you happen to know who this person is? And I said, yes, I do, because Nick and I happened to meet him a few weeks ago at a debate with the Free and Equal folks over at the Election Foundation there. So Jason Palmer, Democrat presidential candidate, joins us here on the show. Jason, Mike, and Nick, thank you for being on with us.
Hey, Mike, Nick, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You know, Jason, it's not funny because Free and Equal and the Elections Foundation is trying to get more people noticed, right? More voices, more choices. So everyone 60% of this country is not happy with this rematch that's happening. We want to learn more about other candidates. And so when I was at CNN, the media folks, they were like, I don't know who this person is. And it's like, yeah, this is part of the problem because we don't give a platform to some of these other folks. So in that vein, I want you to tell the audience a little bit about your platform, your message. Why are you running for president of the United States?
Yeah, I'm running for president of the United States because I've seen the future. Now, I'm a venture capitalist and an entrepreneur, and a few of the businesses I've started before, if you want to talk about them, one was 7 years too early, one was 20 years too early. And so I often have invested in things a little bit too early. As I've aged, I've gotten closer and closer to seeing like what's the immediate future, the 5-year future, 10-year future. And the immediate future I see, especially in my own market. I'm an education technology investor. I've been working on innovation and education for 20 years, is that we're moving to what I call a no-collar economy or a new-collar economy, that more and more of these technology jobs, healthcare jobs, these are jobs that pay $50,000 to $200,000 a year. You can upskill yourself in less than a year to these jobs by getting certificates and credentials, and that catapults you into the middle class. They're like the blue-collar jobs of the 50s and 60s, where you didn't have to go to college, but you could earn enough to achieve the American dream and be in the middle class. Those are the jobs now, these no-collar or new-collar jobs. And why does that matter? Well, in my particular sector, $200 billion a year is put in by the federal government into people going to traditional colleges and universities. And you probably have heard about the college debt problem, 1.8 trillion in college debt and growing. And not enough people know there is a faster, less expensive path to the middle class, and we need to fix that financial aid program so that people can use those loans to go to these no-collar or new-collar jobs programs that are at boot camps and certification training programs. And you've heard of them like Google Analytics, Microsoft SQL Server, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, et cetera. They're not all tech. A lot are in healthcare as well, like becoming the technician for any of the equipment that's being used inside hospitals and clinics. So that's the biggest part, is letting people know we have an education revolution underway, and we need to steer the funding towards helping people quickly upskill to the middle class. The second thing is I see where our economy needs to go from a capitalist system perspective, and it's called conscious capitalism. It's not a term that I invented. I'm part of the conscious capitalist movement. You can read more about it on my website, but it basically involves companies called B corporations and impact investing. And B corporations are companies that don't exist just to make profit. They actually can have a multiple stakeholder approach. So a company can be people first and actually care the most about its employees or its customers, or it could be focused on improving the community or improving and having positive impact in the world. And all the companies I invest in are focused on this positive impact in the world. They're trying to help people get out of prison and get their first job. They're trying to help people graduate from high school or get these middle-class credentials I was just talking about. And so we need to move our whole economy towards conscious capitalism. And there's a way to do that by passing a national B corporation law and actually changing the tax code so that if you're 100% focused on profit and shareholders, You would be a C corporation, you'd pay a 25% tax rate. If you're a B corporation, you would only pay a 15% tax rate. And having been someone who went to Harvard Business School and has started a lot of companies in my life, I know every corporation in America will kind of twist itself over in a knot to try to become a B corporation. And in fact, big companies like JP Morgan, Chase, American Express, Patagonia, Whole Foods, Amazon have actually talked about moving themselves towards being in this conscious capitalism mode or this stakeholder capitalism mode, but they don't have a reason to do it yet. So we actually have to change the tax code to create this incentive to move the entire economy into for good businesses. There's more to the agenda focused on climate change, which is another part of impact, focused on giving people more rights and human rights around the world, which maybe we can get to.
Jason, to that end, about just what you really sort of projected there in terms of economic vision, compare that to, we heard the president on Thursday, State of the Union, talk about the fact that there are more jobs now not requiring a college degree, which is what you were speaking to a moment ago.
Yeah.
But what seems to get in the way of us really fully embracing that I really like that phrasing, by the way.
No collar or new collar.
Yeah, I will attribute that to you forever and ever going out of this conversation.
Well, the thing is, I haven't even decided, is it no collar or is it new collar? Most of the young people I talk to say there's no collar at all in my world. So it should be no collar. So the youth are convincing me it needs to be no collar.
Yeah, I got sweaters that have no collar. I mean, and it works for most of my meetings. So, but Jason, what then holds us back from embracing an economy that you just envisioned a moment ago?
Well, there are many things. The biggest is, and this is actually the third pillar of my campaign, is that we need to modernize the government. The government is stuck in the human resources and financial management and kind of organizational design structures that date back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and it hasn't really been upgraded. And people who've been in government, probably a lot of whom are listening to the show, know about your GS-11, your GS-12, you get raises based on seniority. There's a whole pension system, and it's kind of geared towards people who are lifers, who are going to be in the same company, in this case, the government, for their whole life. What we need to do is we need to transform that HR system so that people can go into the government for 2, 3, 4-year tours of duty. And these could be entrepreneurs, they could be business people, they could be people who work in nonprofits, but they don't want to devote their life to the government. They want to go in, they want to have an impact, and they want to move on. And we also have to add more GS levels, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and actually have them be based on merit and actually be giving people promotions and additional pay. Government pay has fallen way behind the private sector. People in government need to be paid more. You probably won't hear that from any other candidate, but that is definitely the truth. And that, at the same time, we're paying way too much for consulting firms in the government because we've been trying so hard to squash down the number of employees. And that is actually, we're paying 2 or 3 times more for all these consultants that are running around in the government as well. So there's, too many consultants. Employees are not being paid enough. The best and brightest are not necessarily going to work in government anymore. We need to revitalize this love of public service that used to exist here. And we got to change all those policies, HR policies, technology systems. This is not the sexy stuff, so I usually don't talk about the third pillar that much, but it actually is the most important if we're going to modernize our government and get it focused on delivering, the services that people need rapidly, efficiently, and correctly.
Jason, let's get into a little bit of what you were hearing as you've been making the trail. You were telling me off air, and I want to bring it over here about some of the states that you've gotten on the ballot on. But let's dive into why we're actually talking to each other, which is the victory in American Samoa. And obviously, you had mentioned, I was mentioning earlier about the CNN stuff, and you happened to be in an interview with Laura Coates that night. So you were saying that this wasn't your typical victory. You did some town halls there. You had actually never visited there, but you heard some voter concerns. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is you were hearing from voters and why you think that they voted for you as their candidate?
Yeah, I think the reason that I won in American Samoa really boils down to 2 things. One was a great local team, Miracle, and a team of 3 part-time employees did a phenomenal job over the last month of really getting out there, rallying people, talking to them individually one by one. And then two, really engaging with those voters over these virtual or Zoom town halls, kind of like this actually, and listening to their concerns. And they had three main concerns. One was about education. They need to have more resources for education. This is actually already a key part of my platform. I learned details that are very important that I don't think any presidential candidate has really learned before, which is that their one college in American Samoa is a community college, and it doesn't allow you to get these advanced degrees. So if you want to go into healthcare, you have to fly to Hawaii, you have to go off the island, you have to move apart from your family. So we need to help upgrade that college so it could do four-year programs and these certificate programs I was talking about. And I actually engaged with the voters and talked to them about this and learned that was their need, and it matches my expertise. Then we went on to healthcare. Healthcare is a big issue there. It turns out they only have one hospital on the island. They've been trying for the last decade to get enough resources to get a second hospital built. They also need to upgrade a lot of systems and technology in the first hospital. So I made it part of my platform that, of course, we're going to give you the resources you need to bring first hospital up to snuff and to actually build that second hospital. Really simple stuff that the United States has not been doing. And then the third is also a big part of my campaign already, which is about climate change. And this is a place that could actually be an exemplar for climate change. We can make it a carbon neutral island. It's really 5 islands that are populated there, but one is, majority of the people are living on the one island. And we can actually implement solar panels, wind farms, geothermal, and actually turn this into a carbon neutral place in the United States and show how it actually reduces the loss of the coral reefs, can save the shorelines that are being eroded. Their tuna industry has been severely impacted both by the Jones Act and also by climate change. These are the types of things I talk to them about. And I think like the level of detail that I listened to them at and could respond to them at, and then I did a 6-minute video so it could be propagated across the whole island. One of my employees said this, and I think it's kind of true. Like everybody that gets a chance to hear me and that sees that I listen to them and then come up with policies that we can put into our platform that actually address their needs, that's a different kind of politician. There's been nobody like that really. Maybe Bill Clinton back in the 90s. And they gravitate to it. The problem is I just can't get out there to talk to everybody. And that's why I actually built and deployed an artificial intelligence version of myself on my website, which has gotten a little bit of press lately too, where you can actually go to my website and you click on the Palmer AI button and you can ask a talking head version of myself any question you want, and I will give you answers based on my policy platform, because I feel like I need to have that 3 to 5 question exchange or 15-minute interaction with everybody for them to realize, wow, this is a serious candidate and he actually gets the issues, and he hasn't been in politics his whole life. How's that possible?
It probably works in your favor, not being in politics.
I guess that's true. People do want an outsider. So,
well, to that end, the vision that you're speaking of an economic vision, what we talked about before, it sounds incredible and it's very clear.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're having this conversation today because you represent or running for 1/3 of the way our current government operates. Seemingly right now, our legislative branch has been perhaps the most problematic. We saw a little bit of that on Thursday with conservatives yelling and trying to shout down the president. And there's been more and more of a loss of decorum, in Congress at this point. Mm-hmm. And I know I'm probably showing my age saying something like that, but it simply is what it is. For a vision like yours to be executed, and for anyone's, regardless of who wins this election,
yes,
it seems to be the problem is that part of it is what's going on in the legislative body. Jason, what's your read of why Congress continues to devolve into really what seems to be on both sides sometimes, almost a cartoonish reality show, and something that seems to be the complete antithesis to what our founding fathers and mothers really tried to intend?
Yeah, I'm going to go fast past your question that you ask and say, the people that study this about polarization, they say it's partly due to social media, that you can trace it back to the growth of social media. Then some people say it even goes back to 2000 and it's, related to the kind of rearrangement of the parties, and maybe even 2008 with the Tea Party movement, or when Obama was elected. Like, it definitely has been growing. All the charts I see show more and more polarization. At this point, I am done researching it, and I'm ready to do action. So this week I'm announcing a new organization that's going to be going in parallel with my presidential campaign, called Together, with an exclamation point. And Together is going to focus on investing in 20 down ballot races for Congress, where we are specifically going to target and try to displace the crazies that are in Congress with more common sense, or I actually call them radical common sense candidates who will run against them. And I'm purposely going to pick purple districts where I think I can get a blue representative elected and kind of flip it from red to blue. And this isn't like a new thing for me. Back in 2018, in February, March timeframe, I went on Facebook in a very public way, which is kind of different for a business person, and said, I did all this research over the weekend. I'm investing in these 20 women that are running for Congress. The primaries hadn't even happened yet. 19 of my 21 at the primary level, and 16 of the 21 when it finally came true at the end in November of that year. This time I'm doing the same thing, but I'm going to focus it on young people. I'm going to raise a PAC and a super PAC to try to make it as big and as impactful as possible. Last time it was just my own money. And we don't just need to take the presidency back. We need to actually take the Congress back and put more radical common sense center people in there. And I also might be the first PAC. I haven't done enough research on this, or PAC or super PAC, that will give to both parties, actually. So I am going to mostly give to Democrats. Obviously, I am a Democrat. But if it, to displace Marjorie Taylor Greene, we actually need to invest in a common sense Republican to knock her out at the primary level. I will do that. And I am very upset at the people who last time around tried to get the crazies elected. That was a terrible strategy that some people in my party pursued. We need to bring people back to the center, and the organization is called Together! Exclamation point.
Listen, I mean, you're not going to get two bigger supporters of that radical centrism than me and Nick. Although some people.
Well, that's partly why I'm here. I've done my research too.
There we go. Okay, another listener there and another subscriber. Shout out to producer Tim. He'll probably clip that, so that will live in the pantheon of this show. All right, Jason, I do want to ask you, because you and I were talking a little bit before air, and I didn't get to ask you this. So let me ask you this here. Michael Bloomberg won American Samoa once upon a time, right? And I'm not sure how much Bloomberg got in terms of the ability to talk to other folks on the campaign side for President Biden at the time. I'm not sure if you've even been approached by anybody there. You were telling me, and you've said this in articles, about your friend telling you the chance of you winning the presidency is like an ant building a spaceship, which I thought was correct. a really bad friend. But at least he told you bluntly. So what I want to ask you is, and you just kind of gave a little bit of your answer of like what your plan is to do. But as you continue to carry this out right now, what is your message to President Biden right now? If he were to reach out to you and say, look, you've done a little bit of the legwork, you've gotten a little bit of the voters telling you some top issues for you, and they obviously voted for you, what would be your message to him as we get ready for this election cycle? If nothing goes in your direction, you mentioned a little bit about the PAC, but like, what else would you want to message to the president right now?
Well, the biggest thing is to get aligned with my new PAC and my new super PAC, because we're going to be focused on getting young people out registered to vote, and independents who Biden is polling not that well with actually right now. And in order to get those people energized, there's a few things that Biden needs to tweak. But overall, I do agree with President Biden on probably 90% of things at this point. But the things he needs to tweak are, he needs to have a positive economic vision for the future. I hope he starts using the phrase conscious capitalism. Wow, I even tongue-tied myself on that. Conscious capitalism. I hope he starts talking about the no-collar economy. I thought it was great what he said in the State of the Union. It's in that direction about you don't even need to go to college and you can actually get to the middle class. And he really needs to talk more to young voters himself. He needs to actually make himself more available. I'm part of the Free Biden movement. Free him up. Let him talk. Because when he talks freely, he's very authentic. People care about what he says. He cares about what they say. I think he could have done the same exact thing. If he had taken as many hours to work on American Samoa as I did, he would have heard those same concerns. He would have authentically listened to them, and he would have responded to those voters. And he's very good in that environment. So that's what I would recommend to him is be your authentic self, talk to voters, and conscious capitalism, no collar economy. That's the way to go. Positive, optimistic vision of the future. Rebuild the middle class.
Jason, on that point, we've talked now about I've alluded to the State of the Union a little bit.
Yeah.
And what you've been speaking to about free Biden seems to be, I think you've been more succinct about your analysis of it, seems to be sort of what people are picking up on, that the energy on Thursday is probably the most galvanizing we've seen from the president in a while. For me, it almost borders on, the 2017 speech after Charlottesville. From your stance, what was your take on the speech? And where in what you've heard and seen from the president are those opportunities for him to really just further enhance that, to really further lean into to being freed up? Like what should his team potentially try to cut back on or try to not get in the way so that the most authentic version of Joe Biden is who we see from March 10th up until November 5th?
Yeah. Well, I think it's less about the messaging other than, having that economic messaging I was just talking about. I think that needs to be front and center. He also and did talk about women's reproductive rights. I think that is a key part of this election and really will drive a lot of people to the polls. But it's more about where Biden goes to speak. So, for example, we just passed a massive infrastructure bill. You should be where high-speed rail lines are opening up, or where there are buses that are running completely on green energy and talking about that, like kind of roving reporter Biden showing how the shovels are being put in the ground, the actual jobs are being created. And that applies to the Inflation Reduction Act too. There are something like 300,000 jobs that have been created that are green energy jobs related to climate change. Go to where those places are, show all those solar panels being put up or the geothermal thing being built in the ground, like actually demonstrate that your policies led to these jobs and this green outcome. This is why the American people are not happy, even though the jobs keep going up, according to reports. It doesn't match their reality. They need to see much more of this. And, people like Pete Buttigieg could be doing this, and he is starting to do it. I saw him on TV the other day. He's a great spokesperson, but we need to get everybody out there talking about real live examples with real live people where the money is being put to work successfully. I do think it's less about messaging, and it's more about a lot more messaging with real living examples.
I like that, and I agree with that. Jason, before we let you go, palmerforpresident.us, and I know you're going to tease the site in a second, but we like to do this when authors come on the show, and I always make the joke of, hey, your book is there, somebody has picked it up, you lean over their shoulder, you whisper, hey, I wrote that book, let me tell you what it's about. So now people go for palmerforpresident.us. They don't want to read the whole thing. They want to hear it from the man himself right now. Give us a little bit of the politician right now. What is Jason Palmer? What does he stand for? What's the platform? How can they donate? How can they get involved? Tell us a little bit more, Jason.
Yeah, you vote for Jason Palmer if you want our country to move into the future right away, not in 20 years. So I am a technology forward investor and entrepreneur, and I want to bring that to the federal government. I think I'm the first time a real entrepreneur has actually run for president, as opposed to someone who owned a non-technology business. I should say technology entrepreneur. And on the website, there are 25 different positions we didn't get to talk about on immigration, on Gaza. These are some of the most important issues that come up right now. And I have a coherent philosophy that really boils down to the people need to have as much freedom as possible. The government needs to be organized in a technologically savvy way so it delivers high quality services to people. And wherever possible, we need to move our politics back to the common sense center, or the radical common sense approach, and actually pass and modernize our laws and our implementation of those laws in an efficient manner. Now, if you want an efficient business person approach to a democratic politics, I'm your guy.
I love it. That's a great pitch right there. And we got a golf clap there from our co-host, Jason Palmer. Like I mentioned, palmerforpresident.us. Jason, listen, continued success to you in whatever direction it goes. We love the idea that you're going with respect to the PAC and pulling people back into
Yeah.
the proverbial middle. I think that's truly important in our politics and how it's become so divisive. So I wish you all the best, continued success to you, sir, and please stay safe.
Same. Thanks to both of you. This has been fun.
All right, that's our show. Our thank yous again to presidential candidate Jason Palmer. Like I mentioned, palmerforpresident.us. You can go check out his platform there. Great interview there. But if you want to check out the video portion of our interview with Jason, head over to our YouTube channel, type in Can We Please Talk Podcast. We should pop right up. Hit the subscribe button for me while you are there. Audio podcast platforms, you know them by now, Apple, Spotify, Google. Shout out to everybody who listens to us over on Good Pods. Shout out to Acast, our hosting platform. We can't do it without them. You know, we can't do it without each and every one of you that listens to this program. As always, I am Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Severi.
We'll see everybody next time.